a very warm welcome to our Insight session, where we bring together the discussions that were being held in the breakout rooms. And I will present to you very briefly our distinguished panel, led by Zinaida, Arab, and Nurzat, who each bring their own wealth of experience, both with the program as well as from previous backgrounds and current roles with them. But of course, today we focus on Switch Asia and how we can make use of all the insights that you shared in the breakout rooms for the future of the program. And we have been discussing about two key elements for transformation: stakeholder engagement and innovation. And I would like to ask first Zinaida, what really is transformation according to your contributors? And what are its three most important elements? And of course, I hope that innovation and stakeholder engagement are among them. But I'm also excited about it if they are not.
Thank you very much, Cosima. So indeed, our colleagues have been speaking about the enabling factors which are particularly critical for transformative process towards circular economy and SCP uptake as a instrument and strategy towards it. So, and the important which came across collectively across our exchange is a market transformation. It is educational systems and education at different level, naturally. It is innovation ecosystems, and it is also more coherent and systemic approach to policies. So not limited to circular, not limited to particular stakeholders group or target group, so to speak, but really quite systemic approach to that. And in terms of what it means for our contributors, and it resonates also with my view, it is really something transformative or transformation, something which is qualitatively different and what lasts long. Now, what colleagues also have done is brought it to a couple of suggestions of how to go into this transformative mode of acting. And let me just bring up two recognizable suggestions, but in my view quite important. And one of them is working with roadmaps. And the reason for that is because circular economy is just not happening overnight. It would be rather a long process with multiple partners and multiple elements, and building this sort of roadmaps with attention to the details, to the stages, to anticipation of risks, identification of opportunities is quite critical. But another very important discussion we had, and this is the last of my points, is about innovation. And the point which has been brought forward is that if we equate innovation and transformation with the formula many is, the quantity is being transformed into quality, we may not actually achieve the circular economy or desirable climate targets, simply because the current ways of acting, well, opinion may different, but current ways of acting and current technology may or may not be, well, maybe not enough. And therefore, we have to have innovation ecosystems in order to discover new technologies and new ways of acting. I will stop here. Thank you.
Nurzat, you have been discussing innovation for 1.5 hours now with Switch Asia stakeholders. How did you also speak about the different definitions of innovation, and what is your relation to those definitions that came up during the discussion?
Yes, thank you for this opportunity. And in our group of discussion, we had a really very interesting session talking about the insights and innovations, but not more maybe coming to the definition, but about the approaches into the invent the innovations, and what was the personal experiences coming from the different angles. Because in our session we had experts who was working with the citizens and the household level. We had an experience from the SME sector. We had from the finance point of view, and we had the governance policy issues. So I think that the innovation is a very important approach in each level. Is in general the topic is pretty much about being the innovative. It's also about coming to the common understanding. It's about to having the same baseline, and also thinking about that how to overcome the bottlenecks which exist and solve it in a creative way. So our speakers was talking about in this point of view on the project implementation, and also on the project governance, and as well as on the access to the finance point of view. And I think that this is also very important, just to continue what Zinaida emphasized regarding the innovative enabling environment, because this is the important things about to having the complex and holistic approach when you are trainings, when you are doing the policy work, in order to have the right regulation in place, and to have a right motivation to the businesses and citizens and consumer level, and also about creating the right financial instruments in order to make it possible these activities to be happen in a place. And I think that innovation is more about also related to the cultural background, because each country has their own cultural background, and it's very important also to understand this cultural background in order to bring these things happen, and being innovative in order to considering also this cultural differences. Because in our example of for example, the project which was happening in the SME sector for the green financing. So, for example, in China, maybe Victor from our panel, he can contribute later on my speeches. So it's about, for example, crowdfunding. So also there was a questions on the audience regarding the startups, small businesses, how to actually get access to the finance, because sometimes for the startup businesses it's very difficult to get the finance on the banking level, because they are not a bankable project. Maybe there is not enough also understanding doing the business plan and doing such a good project. So in this point of view, it's also very important that to create such a business incubators and other unions where the small businesses can become able to get the access, to get this understanding and knowledge in order to start the sustainable consumption and production approaches applicable to their businesses.
I really like this simple take that innovation basically means doing things differently, and that this can also mean different things in different national contexts. That's a very, very unique way of putting it, and I'm not surprised that this is coming from our Switch Asia community, both points. Arab, with regard to the stakeholder engagement session, what were the main points that you discussed there, and how do you relate this with your previous experience as SCP facility team leader?
First, I had really a very interesting panel, and the composition will be reflected in what I'll be presenting, because each one has been looking at the stakeholder from their perspective, which are their key stakeholders with whom they have to engage. So, two regional institutions, Central Asia and South and Asia, one European institution based here, and a grant project. Interestingly, if you put them all together, you have the whole system of stakeholders, in fact, that need to be engaged in SCP. But not each one of them can cover them all, because they have their priority sector on where to work. So it's extremely interesting to see it from this perspective, that at the end of the day, in entering in the work of sustainable consumption production, each one will have its drivers, I would say, driving stakeholder. But the interesting issue, in order to engage them, is to ensure that they are properly put in the overall ecosystem understanding, or the system understanding, so that what they will be doing will be taken up or understood better in the whole system. And I think this is the main outcome on what I've been discussing with the four stakeholders. So keep in mind, when you are working with two stakeholders, you still have 6 or 10 others who are as important as you if you want to have an impact and you need to scale up. So how to engage with them and to get them on board with you? Of course, explain to them properly what is SCP and what is their role there, but explain it in simple terms. As one of them said, demystify the terms and make them understandable, practical, implementable to the different targets. You cannot present SCP the same way that you can present it to a university or to young youth people or to an administrator or to the industry. Each one has its way of understanding SCP. So you want to engage them properly with you, adapt your language to the stakeholder you have in front of you, while explaining clearly that they are part of a system. And if they want that they have what they have implemented to be taken up, to be scaled up, they cannot work in silo. They have to bring the different stakeholders with them. So this is an extremely important element. And of course, we covered, as I said, all the stakeholders. Would it be the youth, the manager from one side? They need to connect both of them. On the others, basically the industry, bringing the government, working with them, connecting them, making sure that they are there. And what is interesting, an element point, and I think this is something that we can learn from also, is one of them said very clearly, we need to connect science to policy, but when connecting science to policy, we have to make sure that we design the right question with the stakeholders. So not us coming with the question and telling them, okay, let us do this, but find an opportunity to design the question with them, work it together in order to find the appropriate reply to that. And lastly, from the, without listing all the stakeholders, we're talking about sustainable consumption and production, we're talking about local partners, we're talking about local communities, and it is essential to put them in the equation and from the grant perspective, which are their main target, while working with them, ensure that this is well put in the government perspective. So what is the outcome of the grant project can effectively be taken up, but I will come to with other elements afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arab. So this type of sharing perspective, but also being open to learning from others, from their perspective, and adjusting language, I think, Zinaida, this is also something really important for the SCP facility. And what are maybe also other points that you would like to elaborate on, both in terms of Nurzat's answer to the innovation question, as well as to what Arab presented on stakeholder engagement?
Well, I thought the idea of locally based innovation and locally based knowledge is quite important. That is really not only to manifest respect for the local traditions and actions, but it is also to secure transformation from the perspective of discussion of our group. So unless something jazzes and resonates with local realities, nothing will take root. And yes, Arab, it's true that, well, in fact, our panel was equally lucky. We had representatives of stakeholders of Switch Asia, which also have their variety of stakeholders. And maybe, Cosima, what I could do is highlight a few points on what innovations we discovered within the stakeholders' realities, as well as from the perspective of stakeholders' engagement. So on the stakeholders' engagement, the new stakeholder, which actually not surprisingly comes, but because it was also mentioned yesterday, so we get back into our virtual table the representatives of trade. Representatives of trade, which when working with SCP stakeholders can potentially uplift our goals, if engaged properly. This is one important element. The second important element is what I thought is the whole discussion of engagement very often disregards the question of who wins or who loses in the process of any transformation. And of course, we all want to be great at the end, but in the process, some cushioning and some transitions need to be planned, that some of the particularly vulnerable groups would need to be assured that the pain is minimized. And some of the biggest players, which are power players also, and their interests need to be quite visible in the discussion, regardless if they agree or disagree with the transitions which is facing us all. So the discussion of winners, losers is there. But another interesting point is, of course, that our partners represented, or our panelists represented different stakeholders, and they spoke about their realities in a qualitatively different terms. For example, educational institutions, which are clearly quite important for as enabling partner in the transition, not only needs to be given education on ESD, but need to be bringing in their learners competencies, which are knowledge competencies, but also capacity to act, competencies to systemically and critically think, and certainly have a certain value orientation. This is a qualitatively different take on education. The market transformation which was brought in as enabling factors is also full of variety of different partners and more nuanced look at what is qualitatively different markets and what partners need to do differently to assure this market transformation towards circular economy. Also is very interesting thing. And certainly some of the partners like government were also mentioned as needed to engage. Some partners as banks were brought forward that their interest is currently growing and therefore it's a great opportunity to grab this chance. So some of these points we know, but it's very good to put them together on the table when we speak about stakeholders engagement, as well as somewhat different evolving perspective of stakeholders on transformation towards circularity.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting. Nurzad, you also spoke about the ecosystem of innovation that Zinaida also referred to, and the importance of different players involved also in shaping this ecosystem. Did you also discuss the role that policymakers play in how the kind of the framework of innovation is set up in a national context?
So the overall enabling environment is very important for the SCP implementation, and especially taking it the innovative way. And it's also very important to see that this kind of the ecosystem is done in a very different levels. So of course the policy is the most important part, because this is actually the framework when it comes from the top up, from the top down, saying that enabling the businesses and the consumers to follow, and there is a rules when it's existing that how to do this SAP. So from this point of view, I think that we have been discussing also on the point of the very importance of the focal points in the policy makers, on understanding of the SAP in one hand, and also creating the favorite environment policy framework for this type of the things. And we have been discussing it in a way that our expert from Adelphi on the governance, he shared about this experience about plastic pollution. So there is not only the strategic level on the high level governance, but it's also the certain like a holistic approach made in instruments of the policy. So I would also add, maybe from my own experience, that not only the strategic and primary legislation we need, but also we need also certain standards in order to make it able and also like require it to implement the SAP in the practices. So, for example, I'm working on the building sector, and in Kyrgyzstan we have been developed the energy performance law for the buildings, which is require the minimum energy requirements for the all new buildings and reconstructed buildings. And then it comes again on the regulation on the construction norms level, and then it comes on the attracting the businesses and the investments into the sector. So, and then also understanding the policy makers. So I would say that there could be the both way. One is the bottom up, when the real businesses are the drivers, and another when the top down, when there is a regulation environment which is actually the pushing for this type of the policy engagement.
Thank you very much. Yes, this sounds really like a systemic understanding of an entire environment that needs to transform in this way. Arab, for establishing an ecosystem in which also SCP thrives, what are important considerations that were brought up during your session regarding stakeholder engagement, and how do local, national and international levels interact there?
Thank you. Just me take 30 seconds on the previous one. Innovation. Generally, we tend to see innovation made mainly by big companies or as a complicated issue. And this is the general understanding by small and medium enterprises, by local level, and even in developing countries. Innovation, and the best innovation, the one that you can implement and come with results, is the innovation done by local enterprises at local level. And then you see how you can multiply it and scale it up. People have this misunderstanding. I can tell you we demonstrated it under SEED, and it's working very well. So this is something that we need to keep in Switch Asia. Now come to your question. I'll reply to you in basically putting it in 3 words, if I respect what my colleagues have said in the panel. To ensure that this engagement of the stakeholders, recognize, enable, accompany. We need to recognize each stakeholder in his place of the ecosystem of stakeholders, I would say equally, making them understand that in the system, the minister is not more important than the farmer, that they are as essential as them in the system. The small business is as important as the large one, and so on. So we need to recognize them and value their place in the system. Then they will feel, okay, I'm as equal as the others, I can talk. We are the platform for that. Then, of course, each one of them requires a different enabling capacity. So in order to engage them properly, we need to see at their level, in their position, What can we provide to them to take them to the next step? Avoid being extremely ambitious because it's too complicated. You discourage them. And don't be shy by having a small step, because small step, you move ahead, you create trust, you move to the next. So enable them step by step. That's something that is adapted to them. And the third one, once you have recognized them and enabled them, walk with them, accompany them on the period they will be implementing to make sure that what you provide them as enabling capacity has been understood in the implementation mechanism. So these three elements, I think, are essential if you want to make sure that you have your stakeholder engaged. And I said it's applied to everyone. It applied to the minister as much as to the farmer or to the local employee. Simply, it has to be adapted. Now, there are some stakeholders that are absolutely essential to our system of SCP that need to be given a little bit more consideration. It's not from my current work. It has been raised, even though it's from my current work. Make sure that the knowledge that is available is accessible and understandable if you want to have each and every stakeholder understand it and use it. Next, care more, as we are doing, about local communities and local enterprises to build their resilience, because this is the only condition to work on climate action. So these two stakeholders are essential in the system, but at the same time, in the beginning, recognize, enable, accompany.
I really like these three components, and also, of course, the importance of let's say, interpersonal relations and the trust building and meeting others at eye level, speaking their language, as you said. And so for Zinaida, on your past experience with the SCP facility, what would you say is relevant in this context, and how would you integrate the points of today's discussion for the future iteration?
Well, I guess one point is to second Arab, the observation of your team and discussion of your team, and this point is being strengthened actually by the practices on for a few months, if not years, by our panelists. So we had on the panel Mr. Nazir from Maldives and Mr. Khan from Pakistan, and both of them are the experts which managed, in the case of Maldives, to connect the work of the grant work with policy making, being sort of it's difficult to say whether they were not initially enabled or they became enablers and then sort of handholders or coaches of policy developments, or whether it happened the other way around. But the principle of continuity between different stages, where the partners with which we engage take different roles and responsibilities between the activities on the ground and engagement of the policy and back or across policy domain, clearly very well works in accordance to our experiences. Maldives is one example, as I mentioned. Pakistan is another, where more generically developed principles for building and sustainability is now being applied or sort of mainstreamed or infused into Green Building Code of the national program 5 million houses of the Prime Minister. So, and again, we are not saying that we are coaching, but our experts are working with the government continuously, giving more and more space and opportunity to co-create together with the government. Certainly, that logic of ongoing engagement from probably more giving and then co-creating and then just being a sparring partner eventually works very well. I suppose that that would be one of the points, and another maybe is the fact, and again, because you mentioned the idea of working or probably reflecting on the points which could be useful for the future stages of a switch, I would like to bring two important points which have been elaborated in interaction with our audience, with our colleagues in the room. And one point is importance of the vision. And vision could be long-term vision for the government, or it could be actually very good vision for the people at the household or at the business to demystify and the picture of the future, circular future or sustainable future, and bring out element of fear, which might be there. So kind of de-risk the vision while working with the risks. So this is one. Make it household story almost. And this is one of the interesting ideas for, of course, Switch, with which we work very well through our communication strategies, story developing strategies, etc. And the second one, which is very important and resonating topics throughout our whole discussion, is question of accountability and governance. If we have certain policies, it's quite important to make sure that they are being implemented in a transparent way. And our colleagues, particularly from the government, actually are saying it repeatedly, including our members of the panel.
Thank you very much. I think those were really important points, kind of taking out the insecurity around that things actually have to change, even though it's always a lot to ask for humans to change. Nurzad, circling back to the definition of innovation as doing things differently, what would you wish for the next iteration of Switch to do differently to take up the topic of innovation in a more forward-looking way?
Yeah, so I would agree with my colleagues previously telling that there should be there, of course, very good understanding and capacity on the local level, community, and a cultural background. So there should be the strong commitment and then ownership of the knowledge. Because if we want to really push the SCP in a further way, there should be the strong stakeholder engagement. When we actually involve all parties together into the one action, and it's more about not talking but doing the things, you know. And from this point of view, it's really could be the country level, it could be community level, but we need the holistic approach with engagement, with the communication, and with the capacity building. In generally, for the recommendation side for the future SCP facilities, we have been talking about more collaboration and networking opportunities, which is also creating the maybe a thematic working groups where we could actually exchange experience, share the knowledge regarding the education, governance, access to finance, and also just learning from other and the cross-border countries' experiences. And also considering that policy transformation takes quite a long time. In some places it goes to 8-10 years. It's a really long-lasting activity, so we not stop on this 4 years or maybe that's short projects, but this topic need to be continued over the years again in order to bring this into the implementation level, because sometimes you might be still on the formulation, definition level, but when it comes into the implementation level, it takes time. It takes time to build the capacity, to have these champions in place. It takes time in order to come these drivers in place. And this was actually also recommendation from our panelists is to having the multi-complex approach, not only on understanding level, but it's also on the process level, on the product level. That's why we would be very happy that in the future Switch Asia facilities on the SCP to having this long a lasting vision for maybe like at least 10 years period vision when we would like to have a real example of the things happening. And this is also I can like support from, because this was actually the suggestion as well as like recommendation from our Mongolian colleague who is already having the clean air project and the next phase, another 4 years. And in my own experience also in Kyrgyzstan, I can say that, for example, introducing the energy performance of buildings and sustainable energy efficiency, it takes for us 10 years. Starting from developing the primary legislation, putting in place all the sub-laws, changing the construction standards, accrediting independent experts, and bringing the finance to support all these activities. So it's really time-consuming, but then it's worthy because then there is already the capacity, understanding, and support in place. Thank you.
Yeah, this matches very nicely with Zinaida, what you had mentioned in terms of both vision as well as accountability in terms of policy. Arab, before we close for lunch, we are all in this room Switch Asia stakeholders. And what would you recommend to us as Switch Asia stakeholders to do differently when engaging with the program, when engaging with each other? Or do you think we are doing an optimal job with this?
Not what we'll be doing differently, but how we can improve what we are doing. Because what has been done, I don't think it was wrong, but it was not complete. And it was not complete, of course, I will say from a system perspective, but I look at it differently from the understanding of SCP as a movement. SCP is on a move, and SCP will never stop. You can stop green economy, you can stop circular economy, you will not stop sustainable consumption and production because you have to adjust it by moving, changing your consumption patterns, looking at your resources, you have to adjust regularly. While SCP is a movement, you'll have the stakeholders who will be walking the talk with you. And those stakeholders on the way will take different roles depending what they are doing in this process. So you have to reconsider their engagement in the process and that they are part of this movement that will never stop and on which they will be having different roles. This is one element. The second element and part of those stakeholders in the context of Switch Asia, I will give particular attention to the grant projects. The grant projects are, of course, designed as a project for 4 years, but we need to ensure in the future, as much as possible, a legacy, something that can be continued. What could be integrated in this program that can be taken up, that can be scaled, that can be replicated? And this might require that the entity in charge of it creates more and more opportunities for direct sharing of lessons. Put them on the web, which is excellent. I congratulate Sarah for that, but it's not enough. Even myself, I don't spend much time on the web, but I prefer in sessions like that to see how much you can work better from sharing experience. And understanding that when you share experience, you don't learn from the outcome, you learn from the process, which bring you back to the movement. So it's something that continues, our knowledge is updated, and we have to move ahead with that. So it's something extremely important, ensure legacy, ensure scaling up, ensure that others will taking it up. And in this context, I will join the last point of Nurzat, the financial element. I believe that the next switch should look more carefully at the financing side. We have brilliant projects with great innovations. After 4 or 5 years, some of them might find a way out, not others. How much can we integrate in that? A financial component, which means considering the financial system as an equal stakeholder to be well trained or enabled in terms of understanding the needs of the small and medium entrepreneurs, of the local authorities, to provide them with the loan that they need, which is completely different from the big ticket that the banks are doing. So this is something that for me is extremely important to ensure better follow-up and legacy of the Switch Asia program.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all three of you. I learned a lot in this session. And I think also thank you very much to all the contributors to the discussion sessions, because I'm pretty sure that most of the points that you raised and that you discussed for 1.5 hours made their way onto this stage. It was very, very easy to moderate. Thank you all, although these are all three huge topics. And I think we will continue in the spirit of what Arab just said, to fill these topics with life and also see our understanding of them change together with the ecosystem understanding in a systemic way. That's also so important to Zinaida. Thank you very much to all of you, and now everybody have a nice lunch.
So the lunch is on the level 2. So you go back down 2 levels, and it's